I've never been one for drama. Raised on a modest family farm here in Maplewood Glen, I've grown used to the slower rhythms of the seasons. Planting in spring, harvesting in fall, trimming apple trees in the winter. My father, who taught me everything he knew about tending to the land, used to say that if your life starts spinning too quickly, get back to basics, touch some soil. You can't outpace an honest day's work, he'd say. So, naturally, when I returned home after my father passed and found that a slick new HOA was rising in the area, I should have expected conflict. But I didn't. At first, they seemed harmless enough. Neighbors forming committees to keep the landscaping uniform and ensure property values remained stable. Fair enough, I thought. Then, over time, you started seeing the pettiness. Pink flamingos are banned. Picket fences must be painted a specific shade of gray. Every shrub trimmed to symmetrical perfection. Yet none of those were my concerns. My place sits just outside the official perimeter of the HOA's authority. I still pay taxes in Maplewood, though, so the question of where the farm stands has always been a bit murky. The biggest surprise came when a woman named Gwen moved in about a quarter-mile down the lane. She was in her late 40s, though she acted far older, haunted by a permanent scowl that threatened to crumble her face. It started as a polite greeting at the local feed store. I noticed her brand-new Prius with an unmistakable bumper sticker. Go vegan or go home. Not exactly the usual in Maplewood Glen, where folks love their smoked brisket cookouts. She spotted my overalls, shook her head, and marched right past me, hugging her organic produce like a protective mother. I shrugged it off. That's just city folk, I thought. But apparently, Gwen was more than your average city transplant with strong opinions. The rumors began swirling. She'd already joined the HOA and was taking an unyielding stance on every possible regulation. We need to outlaw GMOs in our community gardens, I overheard her saying at a hardware store. Another time, I heard how she was pressuring residents to limit any meat-based barbecues at the neighborhood block parties. We have to keep the environment safe from all that greasy smoke, she'd scold them. Most folks laughed her off, but some felt cornered, especially the older couples who didn't want trouble with the HOA. Though I tried to ignore Gwen's crusades, they eventually landed at my doorstep. Literally. One sunny afternoon, while I was out front repairing a wooden railing, I saw her approaching in a crisp pantsuit, brandishing a clipboard. She came right up to my gate, pursed her lips, and gave the house a quick once-over. I'm Gwen, she announced, as if we'd never crossed paths. I represent Maplewood Glen's Homeowners Association Environmental Committee. I set down my hammer and forced a friendly smile. Nice to meet you, Gwen. I'm Reggie. She nodded sharply, eyes flicking toward the dilapidated barn in the distance. I understand you operate a farm here. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, I said. We've grown apples and a few vegetables for years. My father and I used to raise chickens, but I only keep a few for eggs now. Her nostrils flared at the mention of chickens. She pursed her lips again. I'll need to inspect the conditions of your farm structures to ensure they're in compliance. We can't allow harmful practices to go unregulated. I nearly laughed out loud. My father's farm stood outside the official boundaries of the HOA, and they had no legal authority here. Even the county's zoning office recognized that. I politely pointed that out. I'm not actually under HOA jurisdiction, Gwen. The property line is pretty clear about that. She let out a humorless chuckle. Our legal team might beg to differ. At the very least, if you've got animals, I need to confirm you're following ethical guidelines. Animal cruelty is no joke, Mr. Wilcox. I tried my best to remain calm. I could sense her hostility as she peered over the fence, trying to spy the chickens clucking in their coop. Well, Ms. Gwen, I can assure you that no cruelty is happening here. My animals are well-fed, well-treated. I'm just a small farmer doing my best. She raised the clipboard. We'll see about that. I'll give you time to prepare. But I'm letting you know I'll be back. She turned on her heel and marched off, leaving me with a sinking feeling that she'd show up again, unannounced, and complicate my already busy life. Sure enough, she kept her word. Over the next week, I caught glimpses of her pacing the perimeter, snapping photos from the side of the road. She'd stand there, scribbling frantically on her clipboard. One time, I waved to see if she'd greet me. Instead, she hopped back in her car and sped off, nearly bumping into my mailbox. Friends who lived within the HOA told me she was sending out email alerts about the farm on the outskirts that might be practicing unsanitary agricultural methods. I sighed. Now, I'm no stranger to folks with strong opinions about meat or about the best ways to treat animals. Everyone is entitled to their beliefs. But this was becoming intrusive, and it was about to get a lot worse. I hoped it would blow over, that maybe she'd move on to a new cause. I keep minding my own business, feeding my chickens, cleaning the coop, plowing my fields, living a simple life. But looking back now, if there's one thing I underestimated, it's the fury of an HOA fanatic on a mission. And Gwen wasn't just a fanatic. She was militant. She was itching for a battle, and I was in her crosshairs. 2 weeks later, I was in the orchard tying support lines for my apple saplings when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. By the time I jogged over, I saw Gwen's car parked and the woman herself standing next to it, arms folded tightly across her chest. The air felt uncomfortably tense, like a thunderstorm about to break. "Hello again," I said slowly. "You lost?" She tossed her head in defiance. "I'm here on official HOA Environmental Committee business. I need to document your facilities as per our guidelines. We have the right to ensure that animals are not being exploited for commercial gain, especially if it affects the neighborhood's environmental impact." I bit back a sharp retort. The nerve of this woman. "You're on private property," I stated, as calmly as I could manage. "You weren't invited. Now, I've told you once. I'm not under HOA jurisdiction." She clutched her clipboard, her knuckles turning white. "That's not exactly true. Your land is adjacent to the newly expanded Maplewood Glen community lines, and we've received complaints about noises and smells." I cut in. "Complaints? From who?" "I've been here for decades without any issues." She cleared her throat, ignoring my question. "I'm also aware that you sometimes sell eggs at the local farmer's market, which means you are operating a commercial entity. That draws HOA attention." I could feel my face warming with frustration. "Yes, I sell a few eggs. I also occasionally sell apples. It's how I make a living. But that doesn't grant you any special right to be here." Gwen took a breath, eyes narrowed in determination. "If you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't mind me taking a quick look around." Her logic made me bristle. That's like saying if I have nothing to hide, you can stomp through my living room. This farm is personal property. I have every right to keep it private. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, feeling my temper boil. "I won't allow you or any of your HOA members to poke around uninvited. It's that simple." I paused, softened my voice. "Look, Gwen, I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to live. If you're worried about cruelty, I can assure you, my animals live like royalty here." Gwen let out a laugh that was disturbingly humorless. "Royalty? In that old barn? I've seen the peeling paint. The fences are too low, and the terrain is muddy. And you feed them what exactly? Corn? Grain? I bet it's not even organic." Rolling my eyes might not have been the most diplomatic response, but I couldn't help it. "The barn is old, but it's clean. If the fences are too low, that's my business, not yours. And yes, I feed them a balanced mix of grain. Some of it I grow right here. It's good enough for them. And for the record, they're healthy." She looked unconvinced. Healthy isn't the same as free from exploitation. I've fought against inhumane farming practices all my life. I won't let your archaic methods tarnish the Maplewood Glen name. Now, I've encountered plenty of animal activists before. Some are quite civil, others are downright aggressive. Gwen was definitely in the second category. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave now," I said. "If you have a problem, you can take it up with the county or the sheriff's department. But you're not stepping foot on my land." Her lips twitched in anger, but she relented, returning to her car. Before she slammed the door, she called out, "This isn't over. We'll see who's in the right when the dust settles." After she sped off, I stood there a moment, heart hammering in my chest. I'd never had such a blatant confrontation before. Sure, neighbors might complain about a cow mooing at dawn or a rooster crowing, but we'd talk it out. This was different. There was hostility in Gwen's voice, as though she decided I was some kind of villain. It left a sour taste in my mouth. But that was just the beginning. Over the next several days, I'd see HOA newsletters pinned to local bulletin boards, with suspicious references to unethical farming. They never mentioned me by name, but everyone in Maplewood knew who the target was. People started asking questions. The kind, older couple who lived across the street for decades came over worried. "We told Gwen we've known you and your chickens for years," they said. "We told her you're the nicest man in Maplewood, but she wouldn't listen." Then the real trouble started. My phone buzzed one evening, the local feed store manager letting me know that a rumor had spread that my eggs were contaminated. "Some folks are saying you're feeding your hens hormones," he told me over the crackly line. I nearly choked on my coffee. Hormones? I didn't even know how to get my hands on that sort of thing. My father raised me the old-fashioned way. Feed them well, keep their living area clean, and they'll lay good eggs. Soon, my small sales at the farmer's market began to dwindle. People, worried about potential drama with the HOA, steered clear of my booth. Some apologized, explaining they just couldn't take chances. Others, long-time loyal customers, openly laughed at the rumors and bought extra, but it didn't compensate for the losses. When my best friend, Duke, caught wind of the situation, he came over to help. Duke is a retired policeman who grew up with me, so he's seen it all. "Watch your back, Reggie," he warned. "Folks like Gwen get real creative. Don't let her intimidate you, but don't escalate either. She might record you if you lose your temper." I promised him I'd keep a level head. Deep inside, though, I felt cornered, stressed. How was I supposed to run a peaceful farm while dealing with someone who'd apparently declared war on me? Unbeknownst to me, the situation was about to ramp up. Gwen had a plan, and from the looks of things, it was designed to ruin my reputation entirely or force me off the farm that had been in my family for generations. And worse yet, I heard from the neighbor kids that she didn't just want my farm to become vegan-friendly. She wanted it shut down, livestock gone, fields returned to a pristine state of wild meadows. I was furious, but I also knew I had to be smart. This was my land, my father's legacy, and I'd be damned if I let some militant HOA zealot trample all over it. Rumors have a way of evolving. What starts as a seed of suspicion can grow into a towering oak of falsehood if left unchecked. Within days, the local rumor mill had spun Gwen's accusations into outright fabrications. I was apparently not just raising chickens, but also harboring exotic animals. I was poisoning the water supply. I was operating a hidden slaughterhouse. It would have been comical if it weren't so damaging. Out of desperation, I called a meeting with some town officials I'd known for years. The local agricultural inspector, Dale, was a friend of my father's. We met at the diner on Main Street, the place that served bottomless coffee and biscuits that could put you straight into a food coma. Over stale caffeine, Dale listened to me outline Gwen's campaign against my farm, shaking his head the whole time. "Look, Reggie," he finally said, his voice hushed, "I'm not going to lie. She's filed a formal complaint with the department. I'm obligated to come out and do an inspection soon. Procedures and all that." I wasn't surprised. "Sure, Dale. I've got nothing to hide. Just give me a heads up, and you can walk around as much as you want. I want to keep everything above board." Dale gave a weary nod. "I figured. I also know your father would never stand for anything but the best for the animals. But in times like these, the squeaky will get the grease, and Gwen squeaks a lot." That was putting it mildly. At least with Dale's inspection on the horizon, I'd have an official record stating my farm was operating legally and humanely. I hoped that might shut Gwen down. But part of me worried it wouldn't matter. She seemed too deep in her crusade. Facts be damned. And sure enough, when word reached her that the county inspector would be coming, she didn't back off. Instead, she doubled down. One afternoon, I found a leaflet in my mailbox. "Join the veganic movement. Help Maplewood Glen eliminate cruelty." The flyer was riddled with outlandish claims about small farms being breeding grounds for cruelty and toxic to the environment. I noticed there was an upcoming HOA eco-conference where, evidently, Gwen planned to present evidence of local agricultural abuses. My stomach twisted. She'd likely single me out in front of a large crowd. I tried to remain calm, focusing on work. I repaired fences, cleaned the barn, tidied the chicken coop. I told myself I'd be ready to address any claims with the truth. Then came the breaking point. It was early morning, sun barely risen, when I heard frantic squawking from the chicken run. Still in my pajamas, I grabbed my shotgun, an old habit for coyotes, and ran outside. What I found was Gwen, brandishing a phone camera, pacing around the coop's perimeter. "There you are," she shouted, filming me in all my morning disarray. "I knew you'd rush out here. Look at this muddy quagmire these poor birds are stuck in." I blinked, more shocked than angry, momentarily speechless. The yard was slightly muddy from last night's rain, but it was hardly a quagmire. My hens were picking at the ground like normal. "What are you doing on my land at the crack of dawn?" I demanded, forcing my voice not to shake. "You left this gate unsecured," she shot back, gesturing at a small side gate I sometimes use for loading supplies. It was latched, but apparently not locked with a padlock. I was concerned for their welfare and stepped in to investigate. "The smell is terrible. This is obviously a neglectful environment." I sighed in exasperation. My property was fenced, but I'd never needed maximum security. I lived in a small town where folks respected boundaries. Until Gwen, that is. "Put down that phone and get out," I snapped. "Trespassing is illegal, ma'am." She aimed the camera closer. "Not if I'm documenting evidence of abuse. The law protects whistleblowers." I could feel my patience unraveling. "Are you out of your mind? These hens are fine. They're doing what hens do, pecking around. You can't just waltz in here. This is a private farm." The adrenaline pumping through me nearly drowned out the sound of the hens flapping about. She sneered. "I have every right to protect these animals. If you won't let me do a thorough inspection, I'll take this footage to the authorities. We'll see how fast they shut you down." My mind raced. I didn't want to make a scene on camera, give her more ammunition. "All right, Gwen," I began in a measured tone. "I've got an inspection coming up with the county. You can talk to them if you have concerns. Now I'm asking you politely to leave." To my relief, she finally stopped filming, though she didn't lose the smug look on her face. She started to back away from the coop. "I'll be back with official support," she said, voice dripping with menace. "You have no idea how many people are going to line up against you." She marched off, letting herself out. I followed at a safe distance, ensuring she didn't snoop anywhere else. My heart hammered so loudly, I could barely hear anything else. As soon as her car disappeared, I let out a shaky breath. This was no longer a nuisance. It was harassment, and I needed to protect myself. Duke's warning about not escalating came to mind, but how long can you stay calm when someone stomps all over your life? I spent the rest of the morning installing new locks on every gate, triple-checking my perimeter. By lunchtime, the sweaty labor had worn me down, and I realized just how unfair it was that I had to take such extreme measures against a meddling neighbor who had no right to be on my land. But Gwen was dangerous, in the sense that she was single-minded and convinced of her moral high ground. She probably believed she was saving the world, one farm at a time. And that zealotry was what made her unstoppable. Dale's inspection was only a few days away. I prayed it would put a stop to the madness. But I had this gut feeling that even a squeaky clean report wouldn't deter Gwen from her grand mission. And something told me she had more up her sleeve, an ace she was waiting to play. I just hoped I'd be ready when she did. The day of the official inspection dawned bright and cool. I'd spent the previous evening scrubbing the barn from top to bottom, partly to ensure no detail could be misconstrued, partly as a show of defiance against Gwen's accusations. The chickens were in top shape, the orchard free of debris, and the yard raked and tidy. If there was one silver lining, it was that my farm had never looked better. Dale arrived right on time, sporting his county-issue clipboard. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a sympathetic smile. "Let's get this over with, Reggie," he said, scanning the driveway. "I don't want to take up too much of your time." He paused, noticing my newly installed locks and a no trespassing sign I'd never needed before. "Times sure are changing," he remarked softly. I led him around, pointing out every detail, from the feed storage area to the compost heap. Everything was in order. The barn structure, while old, was solid and well-maintained. My hens were healthy, with full plumage and plenty of space. Even the muddy patches had dried up. Dale jotted down notes, nodding his approval. "Everything looks compliant," he finally said after a thorough look around. "In fact, it's more than compliant. Your place is better cared for than most hobby farms I've seen." Relief washed over me. At least the official record would show I was on the up and up. But we both knew the real problem wasn't the county. It was Gwen. And sure enough, as if on cue, she showed up halfway through the inspection. She parked outside the gate and stomped over, brandishing a thick folder. "Dale," she called, as if they were close colleagues. "You should see the evidence I've compiled." She thrust the folder at him through the fence. I could see photographs, blurry close-ups of chicken feet, images of my coop from odd angles, and even some snapshots of me in mid-yell when she trespassed at dawn. Dale frowned politely. "Ma'am, I'm aware you lodged the complaint, but I've finished the inspection, and I see no violations." "No violations?" she repeated in disbelief. "Look at these photos. The water trough is filthy. The fence is in disrepair. Anything could wander in. You can't trust what he's showing you. He probably cleaned everything up just for today." Dale let out a patient sigh. "Ms. Gwen, is it? I've done a thorough inspection. A farmyard will naturally have mud, and fences might look worn. But it's functional. The animals are healthy. I have no basis to issue any warnings or fines. I'm closing the complaint." "You can't do that." Gwen's voice trembled with rage. "It's your duty to protect these creatures. You're enabling cruelty by ignoring my evidence." Dale handed back her folder. "If you have an issue with my decision, ma'am, you're welcome to appeal at the county office. But I've got to wrap things up here." He turned to me, offering a final handshake. "Thanks, Reggie. I'll file the report tomorrow." As Dale headed for his car, Gwen stepped back from the fence and glared at me with furious eyes. I could see she was unraveling, her face flushed, her lips quivering. She took a step closer. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "I've had it with your smug disregard. This farm is a stain on Maplewood Glen. I'll see to it that you're out of here, one way or another." A cold chill washed over me. "That's enough, Gwen," I managed. "The inspection is done. Go home." "No, you listen," she snapped, voice rising. "If the authorities won't do anything, I will. I'll bring the entire HOA army down here. We'll organize daily protests. We'll block your driveway. We'll call the local news. We'll make sure nobody shops at the market stands that sell your produce. You'll beg to leave." I struggled to keep my composure. The fear of losing my livelihood made my hands clench at my sides. But something inside me refused to cower. "Try whatever you want," I said quietly. "I've got the law on my side and the truth. And if you trespass again, I'll have the sheriff on speed dial." She let out a strangled cry, frustration boiling over. Then, in a move that shocked even me, she lunged forward and rattled the fence gate so violently the metal hinge shook. Her face contorted into a mask of fury. I could see her teetering on the edge of losing all composure. She was consumed by her mission. For a moment, I actually felt pity for her, but mostly I felt alarmed. Finally, she turned and stormed off toward her car, muttering under her breath. I stood there until the distant roar of her engine faded. Then, adrenaline fading, I sunk onto a nearby tree stump. My heart was racing so fast, I was surprised I hadn't passed out. But I was still here, still standing, on my father's land. Dale, who had witnessed the outburst from a distance, walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry about that, Reggie," he said. "I'll make sure to note that you cooperated fully." "She's well intense." I nodded, forcing a thin smile. "Thanks. I just hope it ends here." But it didn't end there. True to her word, Gwen rallied a handful of her like-minded HOA friends. They came by over the next few days, chanting slogans and waving homemade signs. "Stop farm cruelty now," and "Go vegan or go home." It was surreal. Maplewood Glen had never seen protesters on its country roads. A few passers-by gawked, some honked their horns in support or annoyance, and I just stayed indoors, curtains drawn. It was humiliating and infuriating. Yet I tried to remain calm. Eventually, the protests fizzled out. People had jobs, families, and real responsibilities. Sustaining daily picket lines in front of a quiet farm was too much for them. Gwen, however, wasn't done. She'd post hateful messages on social media, accusing me of all sorts of monstrous behaviors. I'd run into folks at the feed store, and they'd shake their heads, telling me not to worry. Anyone who knows you or your daddy's reputation won't believe a word of it, one neighbor said. Hang in there. And so I hung in there day after day, going about my chores, ignoring the nonsense. My father's advice echoed in my mind. You can't outpace an honest day's work. Maybe that was the answer. Keep doing right, keep working, and eventually the storm would pass. Though Gwen may never change her beliefs, she could yell and fling accusations all day long, and it still wouldn't make them true. A month later, life in Maplewood Glen was surprisingly normal again. Gwen, either worn out from her one-woman battle or bored, had scaled back. A rumor spread that she was focusing her efforts on banning plastic straws in the HOA's community center. My farm continued producing eggs, apples, and vegetables. People returned to my stall at the farmer's market. A few even joked about Gwen's meltdown, calling it Maplewood's drama of the year. Late one afternoon, I took a slow walk around the property, running my hand along the fence that Gwen had once rattled in anger. The sun was low in the sky, lighting the orchard with a gentle glow. My chickens clucked happily, pecking at seeds. It felt like home, and I felt at peace. I realized I'd stood my ground, upheld my father's legacy, and protected what was mine. No matter how militant someone's beliefs might be, they can't force you to surrender everything you love, especially when you have the law and a few good neighbors on your side. I took a breath of fresh evening air and let a small smile curve my lips. Maybe the next time Gwen came sniffing around, I'd offer her an apple from my orchard, pesticide-free, ironically enough. Or maybe I'd just lock the gate. Either way, the farm was still mine.